Hey guys, how's it going? Happy Friday. We are live from my new house, which is super exciting. Obviously everything is still in boxes. We have yet to figure out anything for the new setup, but it is in the works and we are working on creating a really cool new vibe for the home studio for you guys very quickly here. I am just super happy that we are finally back online. We're finally back for the stream. We're all plugged in. We were supposed to be live yesterday, and unfortunately our Wi-Fi was not installed properly, so I had to wait all day for technicians to show up at 4 o'clock p.m. I also wasn't on People of the Internet yesterday for that reason, if you guys didn't know that already, but we're here, we're vibing, we're happy, we're ready for the weekend, and we have got a lot to unpack for the stream today. So welcome, and I'm very glad that you guys are here. You also might tell my voice is still a little struggling. Turns out when you read an entire audiobook in 48 hours, it just gets to you in so many different ways. That happened earlier this week. I'm super excited for you guys to pick up a copy of The End of the Alphabet very soon as well. Lots of exciting stuff going on in the world of Isabel, but none more important than the fact that I no longer live in a flooded apartment. So God bless. We're less stressed. Life is good. And I'm so happy to be hanging out with you guys. As we're starting the stream today, do me a huge favor and help us get picked up in the algorithm wherever you are watching by hitting the like button, depending on where you're watching right now. That could look like a little thumbs up or it could look like a heart. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Getter, Locals, and Instagram. And we're going to say hi to some people here in just a second. So especially if you're new, don't forget to introduce yourself to us and let us know where you're watching from in the live chat. While you guys are typing that in as well, don't forget to hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you are watching. We are in a new home studio setup. We are in a new year in 2024, and we are really excited about continuing to grow these independent channels to talk about things that people aren't using their platforms to talk about, hopefully bringing truth, goodness, and beauty back into the world and inspiring other people to start seeking truth as well. Today we are covering two really crazy stories that I've seen over the last couple of days. One, on TikTok, it seems teenagers are starting to see content about mental health disorders, self-identifying with those mental health disorders, and then self-diagnosing themselves with things that they absolutely 100,000% do not have. I'm going to share with you my point of view and perspective on why I think that's coming from affirmative care and the lies that we've created for trans healthcare with affirming somebody's gender dysphoria, previously considered a mental health diagnosis, now just socially accepted, and why that's spilling over into other mental health diagnoses as well. And then we're going to talk about Miss Universe. There is a new Miss Japan for 2024 who is, let's just say lightly, shaking some things up all across the internet and in Asia because she is ethnically Japanese. She is a citizen of Japan, but she is racially not Japanese. She's racially Ukrainian. So we have a lot to unpack there. But what does it mean to be a representative of your country? Why would something like this never even be considered an issue in America versus everywhere else in the world? We'll get to that at the second half of the stream before heading into our Locals post-stream Q&A, as we always do. Let's say hi to some people real quick. Starting over on Rumble today, John Best, Vlogson, Sylvia, and T3 Rue. Hello, you guys. So glad you're here. Nitty Witty and Angelo and Tommy are kicking things off for us over on Getter. We've got a lot of awesome people watching on Instagram. Some people are saying you guys couldn't hear. I hope that you guys are hearing now. I'm assuming you are because you're actually listening to what I'm saying, so that's good. Don't forget to turn up your volume if you didn't already. We've got Austin watching. First Time Father is watching, says love the shirt. Thank you so much. We've got AHM tuning in. You guys watching from Brazil, so very cool. Xander says, you seem so nice all the time. Why, thank you. I do my best. I try. Neil is watching from Michigan. Adam is watching in Ohio. Jeff's watching in Dallas. Still Trips watching in Sacramento, California. We've got somebody watching in Indonesia, Canada, Brazil, India, Florida, Georgia, India, all over the freaking world, you guys. Good to see you. And over on YouTube, Delane Thomas, Total Package, Church, Amy V, Danny, and more. You guys are the goats, and I'm so glad you are here to be a part of the stream. Also, while we're pulling up this article to react to about teenagers diagnosing themselves with mental health disorders, Instagram, WTF are you guys doing? Like, first of all, thank you. Life is amazing for all of the work that you guys are putting in. But I have literally no explanation for what has happened. On Tuesday night, I went to bed. And then now it's Friday morning and we've gained like 50,000 followers in like 48 hours over on Instagram. Whatever you guys are doing, thank you. I love seeing this community grow and I love getting to know you guys more every single day here on the stream. Thanks to Instagram bringing RTMP streaming over there. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're first going to talk about this article that I came across shockingly from Teen Vogue. And I know we talk about Teen Vogue way too much on the stream, usually for all of the wrong reasons. In case you aren't keeping up with teenage fashion and beauty magazines, long gone are the days where Teen Vogue was a publication to tell you what to wear for the homecoming dance, or how to have your first kiss, or how to know if the guy that you have a crush on likes you back, or makeup tutorials, or feeling nervous about the first day of high school. No, Teen Vogue has become basically a cesspool of leftism, is like the nicest possible way that I can say that. It's turned into why Karl Marx was the greatest political scientist of all time, why socialism is the answer for America and the world's future, shout your abortion campaigns, and more, which is wildly unfortunate. But every once in a while, there is still a tiny shred of journalistic integrity on platforms like Teen Vogue, including this article I just randomly happened to come across the other day while doing some research for a completely separate topic. And that is this idea that teenagers are finding content on TikTok, especially about specific mental health conditions and disorders that are unbelievably rare, and now they're starting to self-diagnose themselves with it, even if they have no history of trauma, no history of mental health issues, no access to a psychiatrist, etc. And so doctors are starting to realize this pattern and speak up about it as some sort of social contagion, which is a term I want us to come back to here in just a little bit. But there's parts of this article I really want us to react to, and I'm really curious to hear your guys' perspective and point of view. If you are a TikTok user, I am very proud to be a TikTok user. I talk about it all the time on the stream, why I think it's the most important platform to reach my generation where we're at in a language we understand, with content that tells the truth, because otherwise there's a high likelihood that other points of view will be overrepresented and people will never have the opportunity to hear the truth at all. So I'm a big stan of TikTok. I'm a huge defender of TikTok. But in this instance, I think there is definitely something to be concerned about. I don't think that's the platform's problem. I think this is a societal problem. But if you guys are on TikTok, I'm dying to know, do you see a lot of content about mental health conditions while you're scrolling through? I do all the time. I especially see this girl who goes regularly viral over and over again, who shares her experience with Tourette's syndrome. She's been on national news a lot. People have reacted to her videos a lot, so you might know exactly who I'm talking about. But way back in like 2020, 2021, when people were first starting to post about having Tourette's on TikTok, people started developing tics and Tourette's-like symptoms from watching these videos over and over and over and over again. So I'm wondering if other mental health stories being shared on TikTok are like almost unconsciously, not even with people being aware of it, impacting people's psyche in other ways as well. I don't know if I'm the only person who's experiencing this, but I think it's absolutely fascinating. At least the doctors that are cited in this article do think that this is happening and are sharing their experience and speaking out now, warning against this massive social contagion. So let's check this out. Instagram, sorry if you get a little bit cropped off. We're still working on a dual output standard for the stream where we both can all see everything, but namely we are streaming horizontally so you can hear what I'm saying, which is the good part. Again, this is from Teen Vogue, shockingly, of all publications, who rarely, if ever, does anything like meaningful in the realm of journalism anymore, but I find this story fascinating. We won't read the whole thing. This is a very, 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 very long article. You can go find it for yourself, but it is a fascinating topic. Dissociative identity disorder is the mental health condition specifically that doctors are starting to be very worried about with teenagers self-diagnosing themselves with this. And if you don't know what DID is, you might have heard of multiple personality disorder in the past. That probably rings a bell to you. That's basically the new name for multiple personality disorder. It says why more teens are self-diagnosing with DID, dissociative identity disorder, because of TikTok and social media. Wild. It says until recently, it was rare for a young patient to come to a psychologist that they interview for this piece, Dr. Naomi Torres-Mackey, who is the head of research at the Mental Health Coalition, with a formal self-diagnosis. Now, apparently, it is not so rare. It's very common. It was even rarer for several of those patients to land on the same serious trauma-related condition. But lately, this doctor has seen several patients who cite social media as the reason they believe they have this thing called dissociative identity disorder. And normally, when DID, or previously known as multiple personality disorder, shows up in a clinical setting, it was induced by trauma so severe that the mind has to forge multiple identities to cope. In other words, you were abused or mistreated or traumatized so severely and so intensely, usually as a child, that your brain has no way to cope with that level of trauma other than by creating an entirely different persona, like an avatar of a personality within yourself that doesn't remember the trauma that the actual real you had to deal with. They've made tons and tons of movies and TV shows and stories about this, so you guys are probably at least loosely familiar with the idea, but this is an extremely rare condition. You getting bullied by your friends, or you having your parents go through a divorce, or something that's generally traumatizing for all of society would not lead to this severe of a mental health condition. DID is usually a result of kids being sexually abused or trafficked, or very, very severely physically abused by adults that they are supposed to trust in their life. So they try to cope with this by creating another personality. And yet now apparently there are teenagers like in droves because of TikTok saying that they now have this thing when clearly they do not. This doctor says all of a sudden, not even some, all of my adolescent patients think that they have this and they don't. Teen Vogue says the DID community on TikTok is growing not only in popularity, but also in number. And as many mental health professionals urge young people to reconsider, I love how they worded this, which experiences require a pathology, which experiences in your life require a diagnosis, and alternatively, what's just part of growing up. The reality is that social media is making that distinction exceedingly more difficult. I mean, it's hard to imagine why, when for the last several years we've been isolated from our friends, we've been isolated from our school communities, we've been isolated from our extended family members, we've been working remote from home on Zoom for the last several years. So obviously, we probably are getting most of our information about humanity for ourselves introspectively and extrospectively with how we interact with other people from social media. That's where we're spending all of our time. I read somewhere the other day that the average teenager spends at least 6 hours a day on social media for screen time. Teenager. So you're also going to school, you're also playing sports, you're also supposed to be hanging out with your family and your friends. But in reality, the vast majority of your day is spent through a social media algorithm. So it doesn't surprise me that people are getting all of their information about their own mental health from the internet. But now it's become so crazy that these doctors are saying normal parts of growing up, normal parts of being a teenager, like feeling a little anxious and depressed, like feeling a little left out from society, like feeling a little bit like the ugly duckling every once in a while, like you have to fake it till you make it and everybody else has it all miraculously figured out, which until now has really just been a normal part of your teenage years. Everything now requires a diagnosis, probably because it's all about clickbait. It's all about how many likes you can get. It's all about how many follows you can get. It's all about how much content you can put out to feed the machine so that people will interact with you and your online persona. So there's now not really a distinction between what requires, in these doctors' words, a pathology, what requires a diagnosis, versus what's a normal part of growing up. So DID is a great example of something that is not a normal part of growing up and is not a universal experience for all teenagers. And yet, this one psychiatrist says every single one of her adolescent patients is coming into her office self-diagnosing with DID. Here's a little bit more of an explanation for you on what this condition actually is, because it's mind-blowing to me. DID, formerly known, as I said, as multiple personality disorder, is an often misdiagnosed mental health condition characterized by a constellation of symptoms. The diagnosis identifies at least 2 distinct identities, but you can have like dozens of distinct personalities, split personalities in your psyche, commonly referred to as alters that exist within a single individual, and you as like the host of all of these personalities are often called the system. Each holds the potential for its own personality, memories, behavior, gender, sexuality, and even some cases, physical manifestations of those different personalities like allergies. So scientists have studied how severely this takes over your mind and your brain. And in some people, it manifests with physical symptoms that like one of your personalities will have an allergy to something that your other personality will not, which is mind-blowing to me about the massive expansion of the human brain that we haven't even quite figured out yet scientifically, but we'll come back to that later. That's just me scientifically nerding out. Teen Vogue says dissociative disorders in general often develop as a result of trauma, but as I mentioned earlier, DID in particular seems to develop after severe ongoing trauma, such as physical or sexual abuse, specifically that occurred during childhood. In an incredibly sophisticated effort to protect itself, a traumatized child's brain can shift between separate identities to manage the distress. It's estimated that DID is present in only about 0.01% to 1% of the population. So at the absolute maximum, 1% of people in America have this, but probably more realistically, about 0.01% of the population in America has DID. I don't know if you guys feel this way, chat, and let me know if you do. I'll read through your responses. But I feel like lately I've seen this word trauma thrown around dramatically liberally on social media, especially on Instagram and on TikTok. Everyone wants to call everything trauma all the time. It was traumatic when I didn't get into my dream university. It was traumatic when I got into a fender bender. It was traumatic when my boyfriend broke up with me. It was traumatic when I got fired from my job and posted it on the internet. It was traumatic when my parents got divorced. And some of those things are actually trauma, but basically we're overusing this word trauma the same way in society that we've been overusing words like racism, like white supremacy, like misogyny, like sexual assault in some cases. I think people are very much overusing that term in the era of Me Too, but like this overuse of the word trauma, in just like in the other examples I just mentioned, is degrading the value of what trauma actually is, to the point that I don't think we as a generation are able to distinguish between actual legitimate lived trauma and manifested trauma for something that wasn't actually traumatic in the first place. Allie says this word like trigger is also completely overused on social media. It's probably because we've felt the need societally to slap trigger warning on literally everything, regardless of whether or not it's actually going to be traumatic to some people. Jack says, seriously, everyone has dealt with some crap, but get seriously crap cards dealt to them. And to genuinely have trauma, like abusive parents or stuff like that, is different from the stress that everybody genuinely has to deal with. Like, this is just fascinating to me. Wild. Okay, I'm reading somewhere else. Alex says 1,000%. Any small inconvenience I see on social media, people are calling it trauma, especially PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, has no meaning anymore. Ooh. Nitty Witty says the online social media version of a person that you see in many cases is not even how they are in the real world. So in some cases, we're like creating split personalities for the version of ourself that exists on the internet versus the version of ourself that exists IRL in the three-dimensional world. T3 Rue says, it was traumatic when my Starbucks order was messed up. Okay, but literally, like, that's the type of example that I'm coming up with right now. Like, that's actually the stuff that I'm seeing in people's content on social media. Omnifist Productions says, yes, I see this all the time. It's part of the victimhood complex. This is absolutely fascinating. Tumbleweed says, remember when people found WebMD and started diagnosing themselves left and right? So I guess this is the new manifestation of that. And Teen Vogue explains this a little bit further, but instead of Googling your symptoms and going to WebMD and finding out that you have stage 4 liver cancer for a cough, now people are watching other people's legitimate experiences with very rare mental health conditions like dissociative identity disorder, where kids who actually have experienced severe ongoing lived trauma like being trafficked, like being sexually abused, etc., are sharing their experience with this condition. And now people are like, how do I say this delicately? Culturally appropriating a disease that is not theirs and like manifesting it in their own life the same way that you would come up with a diagnosis on WebMD for symptoms that you don't even have. Teen Vogue writes about this. Thanks to portrayals in popular culture, DID often looks really violent. It looks really crazy. Again, I said this is like in movies and TV shows and the entertainment industry left and right. So you guys have probably at least had some exposure to the idea of multiple personality disorder. But in reality, the truly scary parts, they say, of DID are experienced by the individual, not by society at large. People have flashbacks. They have amnesia where they like totally blacked out and they don't remember what happened from their other personality. They have non-epileptic seizures. They have brain fog. Over 70%, this is wild, of DID patients have already attempted suicide. Over 70% of people actually diagnosed with this, according to the 5th edition of the DSM, which is the standard guide used by mental health professionals. Fun fact, there used to be an actual diagnosis in the DSM. I don't know if it's still in there. That we learned about throughout my whole experience in college, being a pre-med student, that we don't at least treat socially anymore through the DSM. Does anybody want to guess what it is? Not that hard to figure out. Used to be a real diagnosis and now it's not. Gender dysphoria. Anyway, that's just a little side tidbit for you. But like, this is not a fun, culturally cool, vogue thing to self-identify with. Okay, and this is the takeaway that I want to give to you. We're so in the need to be avant-garde, to be edgy, to be cool on social media, to garner some sort of response from society at large. Maybe because we are so isolated from each other. Maybe because we lack true connection with other people in an authentic way so severely in modern society that maybe even subconsciously teenagers are starting to self-identify with these horrifying conditions that are not fun. Voluntarily, they're starting to self-identify with these things that have a 70% suicide rate and cause seizures and brain fog and blackouts and amnesia because of what they're seeing on social media. Teen Vogue says, someone with DID may lose time or experience minutes to days long periods of amnesia. There's this girl on TikTok named, I think I pronounce her name Jimena, but I could be wrong. I'm going to say Jimena, who has 23 different split personalities. She's actually been diagnosed with DID after lots of ongoing trauma, severe trauma throughout her childhood. And she created a TikTok account that dips into various concepts of DID and elaborates on her experience when she was diagnosed with this condition 4 years ago when she was 21. The reason she created this account, I think, is kind of noble. It says she's made it her life's purpose to help others avoid the same struggle and confusion that she went through. And her videos pop up while people look up hashtags about this disorder, hashtag dissociative identity disorder or hashtag DID system. She doesn't like to follow anybody else with the same disease because she thinks it can be actually triggering for her. But some corners of this community have been glamorizing what DID looks like, I guess, on the internet. And so kids are starting to like self-identify, self-diagnose with dissociative identity disorder. because of accounts like this, for better or worse. And I think it's amazing that certain people have the vulnerability to share their experience with a really true lived trauma and be transparent, be authentic on the internet. I am the queen of be as what you see as what you get on social media. I mean, literally look at me right now. Like, I am just here, a girl in the spare bedroom of my new house, streaming with literally no setup, and it's great and it's fine. But I think people are so hungry, even subconsciously. I don't even think this is malicious, but even subconsciously, for attention, for validation, for acceptance from society, that we have to do something more outrageous and more outrageous and more outrageous to validate ourselves in an everly increasingly outrageous society. And what started as, okay, cool, I'll dress really edgy, or I'll do this cool alternative thing in society, turned into, well, now I have to change my gender because that's what everybody else is doing. And now that's going a step further because everybody is changing their gender. Like 20% of our generation self-identifies as LGBTQ plus already. So that's not the cool new avant-garde thing anymore. Now it has to turn into, I need to have this super rare mental health condition in order to be validated by society, in order to fit in order to have people see me, interact with me, pay attention to me. And I don't think it's malicious. I think it's just a byproduct of the outrage culture that we live in. It says in this article, while there isn't a wealth of information about DID in adolescence, many young people on TikTok list DID as an identifier in their bio. The rise in people on social media claiming to have multiple personalities has sparked controversy both on and off the platform, such as quote unquote fake claiming, which is when you start accusing somebody of faking their symptoms. And apparently this has become such a rampant problem on TikTok as a platform that doctors, physicians are starting to speak out about it and just how dangerous it has become. One doctor is talking about this, saying almost 100% of the 14 to 22-year-olds that I work with right now have self-diagnosed something, DID or something else, using TikTok. She's a New York-based psychologist. When a client says, I saw this TikTok ... I am waiting with bated breath. Where are we going with this? She caveats that TikTok can be helpful, calling it an accessible platform that gives lots of tools and strategies that are not so far from what I would suggest. But she says it can also be a place where many people gather mental health advice and information from unreliable sources. Worldwide, experts are starting to take note. A study published over the summer identified something called TikTok tics. Remember what I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, that very, very, very famous account where the girl is sharing her experience with Tourette's syndrome, and how over the last several years, doctors have been speaking out about a rise in physical tics, that people like have twitches or words that they scream, actual tics that are developing in their brain because of a result of what they're seeing on the internet. This is what researchers believe to be mass sociogenic illness, or the spontaneous spread or behaviors. This is fascinating, and I'm going to come back to this sentence. Spontaneous spread of behaviors or emotions through a cohesive group. In this case, young women. As tic and Tourette's syndrome content increased on TikTok, neurology clinics saw an increase in patients presenting tics, specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic. More interestingly, experts believe many of these tics are not performative. So kids aren't making this up. They're not faking it. They're not just doing this for clickbait or for likes or follows. They're actually developing these tics based on what they're seeing on the internet. Doctors say the tics are very real, though they don't necessarily indicate that a patient has Tourette's. Instead, it may be part of a functional neurological disorder, which is a type of condition that is not related to underlying disease. According to the Wall Street Journal, doctors recommend, number 1, cognitive behavioral therapy, and number 2, abstaining from TikTok as treatment. A neurologist in Cincinnati said that anxiety and depression specifically rampantly increased during the pandemic, and it's manifesting through physical symptoms, and that doctors are now saying the physical symptoms are often symptoms that patients have seen other people perform before. I.e., you saw somebody else manifest physical symptoms of anxiety, of depression, of suicide, of other mental health conditions on the internet, and then you start manifesting those same physical symptoms yourself, even if you have no lived history with a diagnosis like this. And here's where I want to stop reacting to the article. This is the last little paragraph before I circle back to that sentence I said I wanted to come back to. When a patient is self-diagnosing such serious conditions as PTSD or borderline personality disorder, one of the doctor's aim is to validate her clients after they've self-diagnosed with a disease that they do not have and help them make sense of their experiences. But social media has added a new level of complexity to treating patients. It's so hard to pull apart for a teen what is disordered and a pathology versus what is just growing pains. In other words, it's really becoming indistinguishable for teenagers today, for Gen Z in America today, what requires a diagnosis, what is actual lived experienced trauma, what is an actual mental health disorder requiring a pathology versus what is just part of being a teenager, part of life sucking for a little bit, part of your emo phase. It wasn't just a phase, Mom. But like we all went through that, right? That sentence, that paragraph that we just read, that the doctor's aim is to validate her patients, validate her clients. And then when we scroll back up to the one I wanted to come back and talk to about, here it is, that researchers are believing the rise of TikTok tics are a result of mass sociogenic illness or the spontaneous spread of behaviors or emotions through a cohesive group, in this case, young women. Chat, what does that make you think of? Not a rhetorical question. I want you to drop it in the chat. Genuinely, what do you think of when you hear mass sociogenic illness? A spontaneous societal arousal of specifically young women doing something because everybody else is doing it. Not necessarily self-diagnosing with multiple personality disorder, not necessarily developing PTSD. What does this make you think of? I know there's a little bit of a lag, so I'll wait. Oh, I like what you just said, Omnifist Productions. Everyone wants to be validated. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. What do you think of? Oh, you guys have a lot of answers. You guys have a lot of answers. Alex says FOMO. That's not the answer I was necessarily looking for. John Best says peer pressure. Really, for me, the one thing that this makes me immediately resonate with in my brain is gender dysphoria. Nobody, no health professional, no doctor, no school counselor, no politician, nobody wants to call the massive, statistically impossible, unexplainable rise in gender dysphoria in teenagers as a social contagion. Nobody wants to say that because everybody is afraid of getting canceled. Everybody's afraid of losing their license to practice medicine. Everybody's afraid of being raked over the coals on the internet or losing their job. But genuinely, that is a social contagion that is happening for the women of my generation today. There is no explanation whatsoever for why a state like Virginia in the last few years has seen a 274% increase in kids identifying as transgender and seeking transgender treatment. There is no explanation for why, since the silent generation all the way through Gen Z, we've seen a doubling increase generation over generation for the number of people that are self-identifying as LGBTQ+. It fundamentally does not make sense from a scientific perspective. And I say that as somebody with 2 degrees in biomedical sciences, other than the fact that that would be considered a mass sociogenic illness or the spontaneous spread of behaviors or emotions through a cohesive group, in this case, young women. If you guys haven't read Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, How the Transgender Craze is Seducing Our Daughters, I 150% require that you read this. This is your homework, to buy this book over the weekend. I could not put it down. The moment that I bought it, I read the whole thing in like an hour and a half, and I've read it probably 20 times since then. It might be the best piece of investigative journalism I've ever seen, particularly in an era where investigative journalism doesn't really exist. And I'm a huge fan of the work that Abigail is doing from a truly journalistic, non-biased perspective. It is a social contagion. It's exactly what's going on right now. The way that eating disorders were a social contagion in the 1990s for teenage girls, like anorexia and bulimia, social disorders manifesting themselves through gender identity have retaken that in this era of teenage girls. The cool thing to fit in is to change your gender. Even if you don't go through with hormone therapy, or you don't go through with a mastectomy, or you don't go through with a hysterectomy, identifying and wearing the different clothes of a different gender is the best, easiest, fast track way to fit in today's society, especially when you, as a young woman, feel really left out from society. I'm going to come back to the teenage mental health part of this at the end of this conversation before we move into the next topic. But that is what this is. It's a mass sociogenic illness. And yet, interestingly, over the past several years, we've watched a social contagion, a mass sociogenic illness, be treated as culturally and societally normal. Somebody fact check this for me, because my brain's going in a million directions. But can anybody look up if gender dysphoria is even still in the DSM? I don't think we actually treat it as something in the DSM anymore, the diagnostic manual for mental health conditions. But gender dysphoria has always, throughout all of human history, been looked at, been treated as a mental health disorder, as a disease, as something that you needed to be cured of, ideally, or at least managed through all kinds of cognitive therapy, maybe even medication. It was something that was not normal. It was a disease. It was a disorder. It was something that required a pathology. It was not a normal part of growing up. But as these doctors are telling you, the internet is making it more and more and more difficult for teenagers to discover what is a normal part of growing up and what is something that actually requires a diagnosis. How interesting to me that our media, our politicians, our doctors, our influencers, our teenagers themselves are saying something is wrong here when they start self-diagnosing themselves with anxiety, with depression, with PTSD, with borderline personality disorder, with dissociative identity disorder, with tics, with Tourette's. When teenagers self-diagnose themselves with those mental health conditions, which are 150% treated as mental health conditions in the diagnostic and statistical manual for mental health professionals, we freak out. We know something's wrong. We call it a mass sociogenic illness. We don't want to affirm somebody based on their delusions in this particular scenario. We want to cure them. We want to help them. We want them to escape feeling like they have 37 different personalities. We want them to escape feeling anxious. We want to help them not feel depressed. We want to pull them away from suicide. But the moment it's gender dysphoria, which is closely linked to all of these other things that I'm mentioning, by the way, we say, yep, 100%. Your self-diagnosis is correct. We affirm that. We care about you. We see you for who you want to be, and we are going to help you feel more of that thing. Based on what we just read with borderline personality disorder, with PTSD, with anxiety, with depression, with suicide, with tics and Tourette's, and of course, dissociative identity disorder, no one in their right mind would ever consider affirmative care for those things. I mean, could you imagine if your psychiatrist says, you're anxious? Great. We're going to help you feel more anxious today. Here are anxiety pills to make you more anxious, and we're going to manifest that to the highest extent possible to make you feel the most anxious you've ever been in your entire life. Could you imagine if your psychiatrist was saying, oh, you're depressed? Here are depressant pills. A psychiatry degree tells me I have to hand you a depressant pharmaceutical drug to make you more depressed because we want to affirm your way of feeling depressed and help you get there. Imagine if somebody came to their psychiatrist and said, hey, I'm suicidal. And your doctor says, great, we're going to affirm that in you today. And if you're suicidal, we're going to help you actually commit suicide, which is crazy absolutely insane, sadly, is happening in certain parts of the world. Looking at you, Canada, if there are any Canadians in the chat with your MAID program, that sadly is probably very, very quickly coming to the United States of America as well. But that would be insane, right? That would mean the entire world has officially flipped upside down. That everything good and true and beautiful is now evil, and everything evil is now good. That we've completely lost our sense of morality. So far, I see a glimmer of hope in the fact that these articles still exist, that these doctors are saying it's not true, that you don't have this thing. I don't want to affirm that in you. At least we can hold on to hope for anxiety and depression and borderline personality disorder and PTSD and Tourette's for being something that we don't affirm. But why societally are we affirming a mass social contagion, a sociogenic illness for teenage girls when it's about their gender? Why is that okay? Later on in this article, there are doctors speaking up about these mental health self-diagnoses. Listen to this one. Heather Hall is a psychiatrist who has been treating dissociative disorders for nearly 30 years. 30 years. And she has seen patients with DID that are tormented by what they see online. People who actually have DID are like freaking out that everybody on the internet is co-opting their disease and saying either the people who actually have it don't have it or people who don't have it actually do. This doctor says she wishes it wasn't true, that DID wasn't real. It's not true. I think maybe it's not true. Maybe you're not. She keeps telling herself she would love nothing more than it not to be true, but she doesn't even know if her lived experience, her lived diagnosis is a real thing or not, because we've watered down the word trauma and we've watered down now the diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder so intensely. There's another teenager from Auckland, New Zealand with DID. She says that she's completely avoided all of the content about it on TikTok because she feels like random accounts are romanticizing and sugarcoating the reality of the condition. And then I want to come down here really quick because this is the part that I really want to tie back to gender. They're calling TikTok the unauthorized diagnostic manual. And I think that's a fascinating way to look at this contagion. Gabrielle, just turned 20, says scrolling mental health TikTok can be a gamble. Sometimes it's cool and enlightening, but it easily gets overwhelming. She has actually been diagnosed with both ADHD and bipolar disorder, and she often comes across videos that make her question her own experiences. From seeing a TikTok, I'll be like, wait, I do that. Was that something I do as a personality aspect, or is that an ADHD thing? Videos on DID, dissociative identity disorder, have made it to Gabrielle's feed as well. While she hasn't experienced anything as severe as DID, the content inevitably plants a seed of doubt. It does make me a little bit more hyper aware of dissociating. I'm questioning myself, like, am I self-diagnosing? Is this that big of a problem? Here's what Teen Vogue wrote, and I think it's beautifully stated. We all dissociate to some event. Highway hypnosis, out-of-body experiences, disconnection from your surroundings. These are all instances of mild dissociation. How many of you have just driven home from a restaurant when you went out to dinner with your friends and you have no idea how you got home? Like, you get to your driveway or you pull in your garage and you're like, I have literally no recollection of how I got back here. How many of you have just totally blanked out in the middle of class and then been like, oh, yeah, I'm sitting in a classroom right now, or you zone out in the middle of a conversation with your friend? We all dissociate. That doesn't mean you require a diagnosis. Somewhere along the line, the first doctor we were reading about said some people start pathologizing experiences that don't signify a problem. People start attaching clinical meaning and feeling like, I should be diagnosed with this. I need medication for this. When actually, a lot of these experiences are normative and don't need to be pathologized or treated. Look, the really tough reality about being a teenager that basically nobody wants to talk about, especially a teenage girl, is that when you are a teenage girl, your life sucks. It sucks. You hate yourself. You feel like you have absolutely no friends. You think you're the ugliest person that has ever existed. You think everybody else has figured it all out with their life, that they know exactly where they're going, exactly what they're doing, exactly what they're going to do for the rest of their life, and you can't even find your butt with both hands. You think your parents hate you, and you kind of secretly hate your parents at the time. You're always a little bit sad. You are. You're always a little bit sad, especially as a teenage girl. And I remember feeling that way as a teenage girl. I remember genuinely feeling like there was no way life would go on after high school, to say that in the most polite way possible. I struggled badly with anxiety and depression, and I didn't even know how to ask for help about that. But I didn't have the social push, the social need, the social contagion of needing to self-diagnose myself with something like dissociative identity disorder. I kind of just had to figure it out. And I think there's absolutely a realm of conversation that needs to be happening in our society where the immediate response to feeling down, the immediate response to struggling with something, the immediate response to feeling a little societally displaced isn't, I need a diagnosis, I need a pharmaceutical drug, I need to end my life, I need XYZ from a psychiatrist or a mental health professional, I need to make a TikTok account affirming all of my delusions, or most commonly, I need to run away from everything that makes me me, from the most quintessential aspects of my identity, my gender, and change every single thing about myself in order to feel accepted. It is crazy to me that our society is looking at the number of teenagers self-diagnosing with anxiety, with depression, with suicide, with multiple personalities, with Tourette's, with tics, with PTSD, calling every single thing that we go through as trauma and saying there's something wrong here. This isn't normal. People shouldn't be self-diagnosing like this. But we completely ignore that that is the exact same pattern of behavior for gender dysphoria. It's the exact same thing that we are seeing in society today, which is also a mental health disorder, by the way, because we've completely forgotten about that in society. And the answer to our societal contagion, the answer to our individual teenage problems, our teenage dirtbag phase, the answer to our individual trauma, be it actual lived experience trauma or attaching the word trauma to something that we personally struggle with, is not to change every single thing about yourself, and it is not to affirm disease. It's not to affirm delusion. It's not to turn lies into truth and truth into lies. Ben said something in our Instagram chat just now that really resonated with me. He said, people keep talking about trauma response, ... It's called growth. Life is supposed to be hard sometimes. You're supposed to feel left out sometimes. You're supposed to go through hard things sometimes. It's not easy. It's certainly not normal per se in our instant gratification society where we can have something delivered to our doorstep in a mere number of hours, and we can meet with a doctor online in a mere number of minutes, and we can date whoever we want through a screen. We can watch whatever pornography we want to watch. We can stream any movie that's ever been made in the history of the world in about 30 seconds after one Google search. But life is supposed to be hard, because if it's not hard, we don't grow. I was moving this week, as you guys know, and while I was moving and packing everything up and then unloading all of the stuff to start setting up the new setup and the new house and all of that, I rewatched a whole series of episodes of The Chosen, and I actually hadn't seen the second half of season 3, but I was so curious to see how they ended season 3 because season 4 is coming out in the next couple of weeks. And regardless of what you feel about the show, I think there's something really interesting that was just said in an episode that I watched today that ties back to all of this. It's the final episode of season 3, and spoilers, it's all in the Bible anyway, so I'm not really spoiling anything for you. The way that they portrayed Jesus walking on water was so profound and was tied to actual lived trauma for Simon and Simon's wife. Simon becomes Peter. Simon and Simon Peter's wife, Eden, are going through this very traumatic experience as a couple. And while they're going through that, Jesus is walking on the water towards all of the apostles in the boat, and everything is crazy, and the storm is wailing, and the waves are crashing against the boat, and they think they're all going to die. And Simon and Jesus get in this huge argument, basically, but Jesus asks him, why do you think I allow suffering? Why do you think I allow this? Because it tests the boundaries of your faith. I let people go hungry, but I always feed them. In other words, you let people go through hard things because it helps us grow. We don't need to call it trauma response. It helps us grow as people. It builds our character. It creates strength and fortitude that only suffering, only difficulties, only challenges can create in our lives. And whether you're a Christian, whether you are an atheist, I think we all can realize the only way to truly grow as an individual is to go through hard times and overcome them. Jordan Peterson would say it this way: do hard things for the sake of doing hard things. It builds character. It creates a stronger fortitude in your soul that doesn't exist unless you've gone through hard things. And I think we're so quick to tell teenagers of this generation that the answers are all right in front of them, that somebody else's lived experience is exactly the same thing that you are going through, that a magical pill is going to solve all of your problems. Make no mistake about it, by the way. There is 100,000% a correlation between the magic birth control pill and regulating our hormones and every single teenage girl feeling like she needs to change her gender, every single teenage girl feeling like she's anxious, depressed, suicidal, etc. These are all very, very deeply connected. There's a problem when we tell teenagers that a diagnosis is going to save everything, or that chopping her breasts off and removing her uterus before she's even finished puberty is going to solve everything in her life. It's not. Overcoming challenges will make her stronger for it, but we are all guaranteed suffering. We are all guaranteed trials. We are all guaranteed difficulties. In the simplest way to say this possible, life sucks and then you die. But that's true. Life sucks and then you die. And it's what you do with the in-between of life sucking and how you overcome that to make the most of this very, very relatively short experience that we have on earth. I think it's heartbreaking and a shame that we are pointing my generation towards pills and diagnostic manuals and all of the others. Sometimes we just have to overcome. And that's hard for us to admit, but is the most valuable lesson that we could possibly give teenagers. If I could go back to talk to my teenage self, who had no idea what she was doing, was miserably anxious and depressed all the time, genuinely all of the time. I'm not exaggerating that. You can ask my parents, you can ask my siblings. I was a shit show as a teenager. If I could tell her one thing, it would be that. Do hard things for the sake of doing hard things. Life sucks and then you die. Overcome challenges because you're going to be a better person for it. And life doesn't stop when things get hard, especially when you are a teenager. Because the truth is, even though it seems like everybody else has it all figured out, they don't. They are just as miserable as you are. Everybody is, universally. And even though you think everybody else has their shit together, they don't. They're miserable too. But we're all building towards something bigger than ourselves in the process. I don't think TikTok is the problem, by the way. I don't think the platform is the problem. I think it's the culture that we've built in modern America that requires a quick fix solution. It's this concept of instant gratification, where we can have a pharmaceutical drug delivered by Amazon to our house in 1 hour, where we can meet with a physician in 10 seconds through teledoc to give us a diagnosis for something that we don't even have. It's this culture that we've built for the quick fix solution rather than the overcoming adversity, the long-term trials, and learning to cope with struggle that has created this problem for teenagers. So I know I see a lot of stuff in the chat for people saying, well, this is all TikTok and we should all just delete TikTok and ban TikTok. I mean, this type of content is on literally everything. It just so happens that teenagers are spending all of their time on TikTok and not on Facebook or Twitter. But I see this stuff and so many other social contagions and issues present on every social media platform. I think the question for how we overcome it is, what do we do with the tools at our disposal to tell people the truth when they desperately need to hear it most? I would argue that we can use those same platforms that are often being called out for being viral cesspools of horrifying lies that are degrading the human experience as a tool to do good, as a tool to tell the truth, as a tool to inspire and encourage and uplift. And that's what I'm trying to do every single day with all of my social media platforms and my live stream in particular. But we all have a role to play in that. And I think there's something really beautiful in us embracing the courage to speak up and tell this generation they deserve better than mass social contagion. Jillian Speaks Truth just dropped in our Instagram chat. Lying isn't loving. It is loving to speak the truth. We need a whole lot more love in the world that we live in today, especially because we've never been more divided and angry and divisive as we are right now. So maybe loving our society starts with us being brave and courageous enough to just speak the truth. That's my thoughts on that. We're going to move into our other subject here about Miss Japan now for the second half of the stream. I know it's a longer stream today, you guys. If you have to go, please feel free to do so. As you know, the stream stays up on literally everything else. We just couldn't stream Wednesday and Thursday, so trying to make up for some of that time. May's Page, I want to thank you so much for your donation in our super chat, and you too, Tito. You guys are the best. And as we're transitioning into this story about Miss Japan being canceled because she's not racially Japanese, I have a lot to say about that. Do me a huge favor if you haven't already, and don't forget to hit the like button on this stream. That could look like a little thumbs up or a heart just to help us get picked up so other people can hear that message of encouragement and support that they desperately need to. And if you haven't already, smash that follow or subscribe button wherever you guys are watching. Okay, so I came across this story about Miss Japan yesterday while I was scrolling through social media. And now this, also a news outlet that I'm very much not a fan of. Funny how we're doing that today on the stream. We're covering all of these news outlets that generally suck, but actually are covering something actually interesting for once in their lifetime. They posted this story about the new Miss Japan that was just inaugurated to compete in Miss Universe. And there's a new swirling question going around the internet and Asia at large. What does it mean to be Japanese? I don't know if you guys have heard about this story, but it is absolutely wild. So let's check it out together. Now This News was reporting for the first time ever, Miss Japan is a naturalized Japanese citizen rather than racially Japanese as a citizen, and it's ignited a fierce debate about identity. Her name is Carolina Shino. I think is how you pronounce that. Has lived the majority of her life in Japan, but many do not recognize her as Japanese because this is what Carolina looks like. She's gorgeous, first of all. Let me just say, she looks like a freaking anime character with freakish anime bug eyes. She is absolutely stunning. 100,000% deserves to be a beauty queen. I mean, look at this woman. She's spectacularly gorgeous. But here's where the debate got really interesting and where people were trying to bring cancel culture to pageantry again. And let me just say, the same people who are completely outraged by this woman being crowned Miss Japan literally don't even bat an eye when biological men are crowned Miss Portugal or Miss Netherlands. I'm just saying, like, literally nobody bats an eye when biological men get to compete in Miss Universe. But when somebody who is ethnically Japanese, she's a naturalized citizen of Japan, but she's not racially Japanese, wins Miss Japan, the whole freaking internet freaks out. And we're going to read all of the comments together because this made me so mad last night. So here's the question everybody's asking over this woman being Miss Japan. What does it mean to be Japanese? That's the question swirling around social media after Ukraine-born model Carolina Shino was crowned Miss Japan 2024 on Monday. She said, being recognized as Japanese in this competition fills me with gratitude after she won. But despite her having lived the majority of her life in Japan, many do not recognize her as Japanese. She's 26. She's exactly my age. She was born in Ukraine, and she moved to Japan when she was 5 years old. So before this girl even learned how to tie her shoes, before she could zip up her own jacket, before she probably even could say a bunch of full run-on sentences, she moved to Japan and had her entire life lived in Japan since then. Her mom got remarried to a Japanese man, which is why they moved to Japan when she was 5. She grew up in Nagoya and said that living there for so long made her feel Japanese in both speech and mind, but that she struggles with people frequently commenting on her appearance. She said that she wants to create a society where people are judged not by their appearance. Fascinating. Which is what prompted her to apply for the Miss Japan pageant in the first place. When she ultimately won the competition, she said, "It was like a dream. The moment they called my name, I couldn't stop crying. I've had to face barriers that often prevent me from being accepted as Japanese. So I'm filled with gratitude to be recognized at this competition as a Japanese person." But many have voiced their frustration with her win online. And here are just some of the comments. We're actually going to go to the Instagram post here in just a second and read more. But this is how people were responding to this woman becoming Miss Japan. Okay, are you ready? This is wild. "How can a white European represent Japan as Miss Japan? This is messed up." Or, "I think that Japanese people naturally would get the wrong message when a European looking person is called the most beautiful Japanese." Well, first of all, winning a beauty pageant is not anymore being called the most beautiful. It's usually about a whole host of factors, but namely is about you representing your country, you representing your city or your state or whatever to the best of your ability. It has a whole lot more to do than just your physical appearance these days. Some even speculated that her win was due in part to her birth country's ongoing conflict, that this became about the Russia-Ukraine debate, with one user writing, "If she were born Russian, she wouldn't have won, not a chance. Obviously, the criteria is now a political decision. What a sad day for Japan." Again, I would just like to note, nobody says what a sad day for womankind when men win women's beauty pageants. We cheer, we applaud, we say how progressive our society is healing when men win women's beauty pageants. But when a European looking person wins Miss Japan, the entire internet comes absolutely unglued and says it's a sad day for Japan. The pageant's organizer believes that her win gave us an opportunity, I think this is cool, to rethink what Japanese beauty is. Following today's result, there is one thing I'm convinced of. Japanese beauty exists not in the appearance, not in the blood, but it exists firmly in our heart. I think that's beautiful. Like, I love that. This isn't the first time now this reported that the Miss Japan winner, pageant winner, sparked debate about Japanese identity. In 2015, a biracial woman named Ariana Miyamoto was crowned Miss Japan for the first time. Her mother is Japanese, her father is Black. Her victory also led to questions at the time about who should even be allowed to compete in the Miss Japan pageant. I can't. So I'm seeing this on Instagram last night while Brock and I, my fiance, are driving to the grocery store. And these are a few comments that I just immediately had to screenshot for myself. We'll look for a few more together here in just a second. But here's one. "From what I understand by reading this, her citizenship is Japanese as she grew up in Japan. So she's ethnically Japanese, even if it isn't her race." That is a good explanation. A lot of people get the two conflated. They are two completely different things. Ethnicity and race are fundamentally different. Still, though, this person doesn't excuse the way this ball was dropped. She's beautiful, but I thought the point of these competitions was to represent the majority of the people from a particular area. So, if that were the case, I'm just throwing this out there, if the entire point of beauty pageants was for the person to represent the majority of the population of the place that you live in, should Miss USA always be white? Could you imagine that? If that was the whole point of these beauty pageants, Miss USA would always, 100% of the time, be white. And we would not be okay with that. No siree. Imagine the outrage that would ensue. So thank you for that comment. Here's one for you. Shouldn't it be a Japanese woman? Like, they're supposed to represent the people of the country they are from ethnically. No? See, everybody does not understand what ethnicity is also. They only think ethnicity and race are the exact same thing. Or how about this one for you? Somebody commented this last night. So, all of the white people born in Africa are African? Yes! All of the white people born in Africa are African. Do people not realize that there are native Africans who are white in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, literally all over the entire continent? yes, the white people born in Africa are also white. You morons. So there's all kinds of really, really crazy things going on in the comments section of these, and I think it's just ridiculous. Okay, look at some of these together. I'll pull these up. I gotta scroll this up. This person says, this is a Japan resident, not a Japanese woman, with almost 6,300 likes on the post. This person says, she's not half and wasn't even born there. That's wild. And here's what I think the main point is that I want to come back to. That's what's cool about the US. Anyone can become American and just be accepted as that, let alone someone was here since they were 5, but even older adults from anywhere, etc. I think that is hugely interesting and important. This person says, I would be mad too. It should be a Japanese woman. Again, what does it even mean to be a Japanese woman? This person says, I mean, I'm ethnically Indian, but I grew up in Australia. I reckon if there's a Miss Australia pageant and I want to enter, it should be fine. So why not in Japan? Thank you. You get it. The alpaca next door. This person says the people who were mad at The Little Mermaid being black are probably okay with this, with 3,300 likes. No, the people who were mad about The Little Mermaid remake was that The Little Mermaid remake sucked. And The Little Mermaid before was basically perfect, and you didn't have to recreate the wheel to reinvent one of the greatest movies that was ever made. Red4 in our chat says, I'm just going to start telling people that I'm Native American because I was born in America. Nitty Witty says, Elon Musk is a great example of somebody who appears to be white but is of African origin. Thank you. Thank you. This is what I'm saying, people. I genuinely cannot wrap my head around this. I'm reading through your guys' comments here. Jaime says on Instagram, not everyone should be allowed to comment on the internet. Yeah, pretty much. BS Navely says, so skin color doesn't really matter, huh? I mean, that kind of should be the point. And yet people are all of a sudden saying, skin color is everything. You are not Japanese. If you are not racially Japanese, you can't be a citizen of our country, which, let me just say up front, is actually racist. Like, that is what actual racism manifests itself to be. And for a very long time in the United States of America, the point of this conversation is this: we created a society where it didn't matter. It didn't matter what you looked like, didn't matter where you came from, didn't matter what your family looked like, didn't matter where your family came from, had no bearing from your ancestry on whether or not you were eligible to be an American and fully accepted as an American. And we are a very, very rare place on the face of planet Earth where that was the reality. That was the norm. And then kind of overnight, for some people, I think there were definitely nefarious actors behind the scenes that were planting seeds to manifest this way, way later on down the road. But it kind of seemed like overnight that all went away. And now the same people who scream about racism more than anybody else in society, the same people who dedicate themselves as anti-racists, the same people who are going out of their way to post the black squares on Instagram and the fists in their social media bios, are actually advocating for this, for segregation. They're advocating for Black Americans to have their own spaces separate from white Americans. They're advocating for specific Asian-only graduation ceremonies and Native American-only dorms and Hispanic-only gatherings for your classes in college, which is literal segregation that the people who came before us in the last several generations have been fighting tooth and nail to prevent from coming back. But I just want to remind everyone in the conversation of what it means to be Japanese that has spurred spontaneously on the internet this week after Miss Japan was crowned. In America, we never used to have to ask that question. It didn't matter. It did not matter what you looked like, where you came from, what your family looked like, what their ancestry was. It didn't matter what language your family spoke at home, as long as you could learn everything in school. It didn't matter what religion you practiced. It didn't matter. And I think this picture, well, every year this picture, is the perfect image of what it means to be an American. Let me pull these up. I got to save them to my desktop because I forgot to do this before. Okay, there's two that I want us to look at. I don't know if you guys feel this way. but I am a humongous gymnastics fan. My sisters were gymnasts growing up. I was always way too old to compete. So I unfortunately did not get to do that. I was a competitive dancer instead throughout my entire childhood. But my sisters were competitive gymnasts growing up. And I loved going to their gymnastics meets. We used to go to the meets at the University of Denver when I was growing up. And every 4 years, religiously, I will watch the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team compete at the Olympics. And if you look at the pictures of every other country's Olympic gymnastics team, they are all the race of their country, with very few exceptions. If you look at the Chinese gymnastics team, they are all racially Chinese. If you look at the Japanese gymnastics team, they are all racially Japanese. If you look at the Mexico gymnastics team, they are all ethnically Mexican and racially Hispanic and Latino, okay? Every single one of those girls looks exactly the same. But when you look at the United States of America's gymnastics teams over the years, you have black, Hispanic, white, Hispanic in this particular image. If you look at a different year of the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team, wow, that image is absolutely huge. My apologies. I just didn't have these prepared. You have Asian, black, Hispanic, white. But it doesn't matter because in this image, what do you see? You see Americans because it doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where your family originally came from. It matters that you have pride in your country and you're trying to represent your country. And I think it's really, really sad that the same people who are crying and screaming and yelling at each other on the internet because this is what Miss Japan looks like this year, those same people would cheer and applaud for the American gymnastics team, not recognizing the double standard. Those same people claim that racism runs the world in America, but then they refuse to acknowledge when the same standard is applied in other countries. And it's not okay. I would argue this girl is far more Japanese than someone whose parents are from Japan, but they grew up their entire life and were born in the United States of America, and they don't speak Japanese, and they've never been to Japan. There's a ton of people like that, probably thousands upon thousands upon thousands of them. So it's sad to me that we've created this entire double standard. And again, to harp on it for the third point, it's really sad to me that we've created this entire narrative that men can win women's beauty pageants, but you can't represent your country unless you represent the majority of the race of the people in your country. And imagine if we applied that in the United States of America, is all I'm saying when we're talking about the racial background of all of these people. Crazy. What a crazy week, you guys. It has been insane. Thank you for your patience as I was moving. It was a lot going on this week, but as you can see, we're very slowly but surely getting set up over here. I promise I will look a little bit more put together next week as well, and hopefully my voice comes back over the weekend that I don't have to use it so much. My entire new house is coming together, and I know you guys have been asking for a house tour, so as soon as it's all set up, I promise that's going to go up on YouTube and on Rumble. And I really, really just want to say again from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys for whatever the heck that you are doing this week to grow these communities. I have quite fundamentally no explanation for what the hell is going on Instagram in the last couple of days, but I am incredibly grateful, and I take this opportunity to have a platform very, very seriously. These streams, my content, it's not about me. It's about less of me and more of God, actually, every single day. Hence why I like to wear t-shirts like this on the stream and post more about my faith, which you guys clearly seem to be responding well to, with one of those clips getting almost 13 million views in the last 48 hours. I'm doing what I can, like I said earlier, to use the tools at my disposal to just tell people the truth in the world. And it didn't take rocket science for me to get here. It didn't take a whole lot of magical behind the scenes efforts or selling my soul to build a platform and community and followers. It just took showing up. And I really want to encourage you guys. God has a unique plan for every single one of us for how we are supposed to be used to make this world a little bit more like the next one. And you might not have figured out what that looks like for you yet, but if you have any sort of seed of excitement in your soul about doing this from a content creation perspective, please, I beg of you, do it. It does not take rocket science. I don't do these as scripted streams. I'm literally sitting in a room with cardboard microphone on Amazon, and I'm going through a computer. That's it. And this took me like 5 years to get to. I used to just sit there and selfie record myself on my phone. And guess what? Sometimes those videos do even better than all of these videos on the internet. So if being in the arena, if being on the forefront of digital activism, if being somebody who encourages other people to be truth seekers by reporting stories that the media doesn't want to, by telling the truth on social media when other people aren't doing that, I beg of you, please do it, because the world needs more content creators. I think it's really common, especially in the conservative political world, not so much in the Christian world, but especially in the conservative political world, for people to like want to gatekeep the success that they've attained in social media and as an influencer, I like to say content creator, but they don't want other people to show up in the same space because they feel threatened by that, or they think that it's going to take away from their own opportunities to gain a following or to have brand deals and opportunities to speak, and et cetera, et cetera. I am begging you, we need more people in the fight, because if you've spent any time, especially on Instagram in the last couple of days, scrolling through the comments on some of my most recent posts, especially about faith, you have no idea how intense the fight we are up against is. And I can't do it alone. I can't do it with the few dozen of my friends that are doing this every single day. We need every single one of you in the fight. And maybe that's not even creating your own content. Maybe that's sharing the content of people that you admire and respect and putting links out there to your friends and family, like to these streams, or putting one of my videos on your story or whatever. It's one at a time, one person at a time, that we can reach with truth, that we can reach with a new perspective, that we can stop in their tracks and get them to say, hang on a second, I never thought about it that way, that we slowly can change the hearts and minds, not just of our country, but our world at large, and where we can try desperately to make this world a little bit more like the next one. I don't know about you, but it kind of feels like the snowball rolling down the hill going into 2024. We're almost done with January, and there's a lot of insane things that have only happened in 26 days. I'm sure it's going to get a whole hell of a lot crazier in the next 11 months, but I'm here for the fight, and I hope that you guys are too, because it's a fight worth having. It's work worth doing, and that's the most important thing that we could ever show up for every single day. So thank you for supporting me and blessing me in my journey to try to do that in whatever little way that I can, through my stream, through my short form videos, through the book that I write every couple years, and all the speaking engagements that I do. So wherever you guys are ever looking for help or advice or feedback, please, please. I know Alex is already thinking about starting some streaming stuff, but I would love to see all of you guys think about the exact same thing. And Locals is a great place to start to get to know other people who share your values and your drive and your excitement to try to make the world a better place. So we are going to jump over to Locals right now for our post-stream Q&A. The link is in the chat right now, but if you can't click on the link, looking at you Instagram, it's also in the link in my bio. So if you guys want to jump over there to do that, please feel free to do so. YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Getter, Instagram. We're back on Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Before you go, please don't forget to smash that follow or subscribe button to help us continue growing and keep telling the truth. Locals, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.